Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. I'm doing one last sort of coming out of retirement show to talk about this Universal AMC deal that came through yesterday. Essentially what happened is Universal, one of the biggest studios out there, and AMC, the biggest theater owner here in the United States and Canada, came to an agreement where they are going to allow movies to be premiere on VOD 17 days after they open in theaters, which is insane. Absolutely nuts. It is like one of the biggest sort of moments in the movie theater industry, probably in 30, 40 years. But before I get to that, I just want to say, Wildline Podcast, I've loved doing it. It's been all about this, the movie theater industry, the box office. We did sort of put into retirement now because the box office is essentially closed. We don't know when movie theaters are going to open up again, if ever. We hope that they do. I love the movie theater. It's like the church to me. I used to go every Sunday morning to a movie theater. That's my own sort of personal mass. And hopefully they will open up again and it'll be somewhat normal. But for the time being, because there's no movie theater business going on right now, we've sort of retired the Wildline Podcast, and me and Chris have decided to do a new podcast because we love podcasting so much and talking about movies. So we started one called Film Trace. And so what we do in Film Trace is we take a newly released movie, either a brand new movie or a movie that's new to streaming. Sometimes we'll do an old movie that just premieres on Netflix for this month or next month or whatever. And we'll trace the life of that film from how it was conceived and imagined through how it was produced, and then how it was released and how it was received and what was sort of the cultural importance. We've done 6 episodes now. Our last one was on Pineapple Express. We're like, well, that didn't come out recently. It came out in 2008. But it just premiered on Netflix, so you can watch it and kind of listen to the podcast and kind of learn a lot about how movies are made and what are the sort of the difficulties and how is it a success or a sort of failure, either financially or culturally. And so it's a lot of fun. We really enjoy doing it. I think it's a great podcast, so do listen. It's called Film Trace. But let's do one last rodeo, one last ride of the Wildline here to really put this huge Universal AMC deal into context. So what is this deal? What is this big hullabaloo about? What is going on? So essentially, let's just I love context. Let's draw the bigger context of what's happening here. So movie theater business has been contracting since 2002. Ticket sales have never gone up since 2002. That was the peak of the modern era of the movie theater business. Now, revenues have remained flat because what are they doing? They're adding restaurants, they're adding premium seats, they're increasing the revenue per visit, right? Increasing the ticket prices. That's what people always complain about. But that's kind of how they're staying even right now. And they're not losing a ton of revenue because people aren't going to the movies as much. The average movie goer in the United States and Canada, 76% of the population goes to movies. They go to an average of 4 a year, which is not a lot. And so it's kind of a little bit becoming more and more of a niche leisure activity. The heyday of movie theaters was probably, 2002 date, but then way before that, think, Great Depression, World War II, that's when movies were really kind of the main leisure activity for a lot of people. I remember talking to people like my aunt and uncle who are in the silent generation, in their 80s now. And they talk about going to the movie theater every day. That's, it had AC. So it's a nickel. You go to the movie, that's you just hung out at the movie theater. People don't do that anymore. So obviously it's changed a lot since then. And so it's a little bit more of a niche. It's been contracting slowly. But then you have movies like Endgame, which makes an astronomical amount of money. And you're like, well, this business isn't really that weak, right? But I think the fundamentals of the business have not been super strong coming into 2020. And then you have COVID and this pandemic that we're going through right now. And if especially you're not, obviously everybody knows what's happening. You're following the news. In America, it's been a complete and utter shit show. We have the dumbest person ever as our president, and he has destroyed this country 100 times over. And we just today here in the United States, we've passed the 150,000th victim of COVID-19. I mean, that is just absurd when you think about it. We're supposed to be the most powerful country in the world with all these resources, and we can't even protect our own people from a virus like this, where countries that are much smaller, like Vietnam, almost nobody died there from this. And countries in Europe are, they're dealing with this in a lot better ways than we are. So the United States, where AMC is huge, and Regal and Marcus and Cinemark, all have shut down their theaters. And I think when we first shut everything down in March to sort of say, hey, let's stop this in its tracks, And maybe this will last a couple of months and then everything will kind of go back to normal. That never happened, right? Certain places shut down, but a lot of places like Texas and where I'm in Missouri, like St. Louis shut down, but the rest of Missouri did not. And so what has happened is the virus has just kept going and going and going. And now we're in this kind of dire straits where, we can't even keep people alive, let alone have movie theaters open anytime soon. And so the industry has sort of been, I don't want to put on life support, but if you think of any business going or losing 80% of your revenue in a single year, which is looking like it might happen for movie theaters, most companies would never survive that. So they really are, and these are all the big ones, they're on the ropes. And so studios were kind of, what do we do with these massive movies that we've made for this summer that we can't release, like a Black Widow or the new James Bond movie, No Time to Die? Like, what do we do with these films now? They're done, but we have no place to play them and we can't sell tickets because the movie theaters are shut down indefinitely. So what started to happen is, and Universal, I think, was the first here, they started to push them to this thing called premium VOD. Now, you know what VOD is, video on demand, right? Now, how we see that with movies and sort of feature films is that after 90 days, a movie becomes available to buy digitally. They call that electric sell-through in EST in the industry, electric sell-through, or VOD rental, which is usually like $6 HD rental. You get it for 48 hours, right? So it's a 90-day release window, has kind of been set in stone for a very long time. Now, release windows, when I was growing up, were insane. If you're just younger, you probably don't realize this, but like, if you think about, let's say the new James Bond movie came out August 1st for whatever reason, just hypothetically, you wouldn't see that on the movie shelf. You couldn't rent that for 9 months. 9 months, almost a year later, next summer is probably when I'd be able to rent that movie physically, right? And they did have pay-per-view and stuff like that, but that was kind of a similar sort of time span. So the 90-day window has probably been set in stone, I would say, like the last decade, last 15 years, where you just don't break it. And anytime that a studio wanted to break it, there was a huge sort of uproar with the exhibition business or movie theater business, right? So the exhibitors, AMC, Regal, Marcus, Cinemark, they all want to protect that release window because that guarantees them exclusivity of that movie for 90 days. And they can play it for 30 days and get rid of it, but it can't go on another platform for 90 days. And that's really in the DNA of what the movie theater business is all about, is that exclusive window. You can't see this anywhere else, right? You can only see it in this movie house, one of my third, like 80 years old. You can only see it here. You can't see it on TV. You can't see it online. You can't see it on streaming. You can't see it on Netflix. You can only see it here. That's the foundation of the business. And it was, I think, for anybody who's been following the movie theater business, the moment that release window drops from that 90-day sort of barrier is kind of a moment where the entire industry might kind of collapse in on itself, because that 90-day, maybe if it went to 60-day, right? If it was 60-day, I could see it kind of continuing on as normal for another decade or so. But the deal between Universal and AMC is a 17-day window. And that is just insane. That's 3 weekends. So the exact deal is this. Universal and Focus Features is kind of an imprint for Universal, kind of like it used to be like super arty films, like 21 Grams is on Focus Features, but now it's kind of like genre flicks. So I don't know what's going on there. They've changed a lot. So anything on Universal, and Fast and the Furious is Universal. They have the biggest movies, Jurassic World, right? So massive studio, one of the biggest in the world. Any one of their movies, after 17 days now, can go to premium VOD. So if Jurassic Park opened today, in 17 days, they could put it on, and this is where it gets very unclear. What platform are you talking about? Are you talking about AMC's Theater on Demand VOD platform, or any on the Apple Store? Is it on the Google Store too? Can I buy it on YouTube? It's not really sure, and I don't think it's been worked out, but after 17 days, you could rent it for $20 is the amount. No less than $19.99 is the exact verbiage here. So basically, 3 weekends after it opens, you can rent it online. And so that demolishes the 90-day window completely just tears down that exclusive window that is the foundation of the movie theater business. And it is a massive deal because they have tried to do this pretty often. They talked about premium video on demand for a long time, but it's kind of been DOA since I want to say 2015. There's always ideas popping up about, well, what if we charge $50 for this to come out 45 days after it premieres in a movie theater? That was kind of the language and the pricing that we're talking about. Now we're talking about $20 17 days after it opens. It's a huge change from even the initial conversations about premium video on demand. And that's because of COVID, because every single one of these theaters is on their last leg, especially AMC. AMC may be the biggest theater company in the country. They own 8,218 theaters, or screens, I should say, 660 theaters here in the US and Canada and all over the world, I guess. And then, so they're massive, they're huge. Their revenue for the last 12 months, I do a little options trading on the side, so I look at all these statistics. Their revenue for the last 12 months is $5 billion, which sounds like a lot. Their debt's $10 billion. And if you don't think that revenue is going to get lower and lower as the movie theaters have been shut down, it is. They have the potential to be like $3 billion at tops, $2 billion tops this year. And they're going to have, what, $11 to $12 billion in debt. Their business is no longer viable, which is crazy to say. But look, a pandemic happened. The whole thing shut down for basically a year. They're not going to go back to normal anytime in 2021. So they're screwed. So I think what happened here is AMC found themselves in a really tough type position, and Universal saw that and they smelled blood. They smelled blood and they wanted to get something out of them. And, you know, if you think about the deal, so how is this deal going to work? So the weird thing about it, so if it was just 17 days, the release window, and then Universal gets all the money from PVOD, that would be a terrible deal, right? So what AMC did is basically said is, okay, you can release it on premium video on demand after 3 weekends, but we get a cut. Nobody knows what the cut is. The LA Times has a little bit of a sort of inside track here. They say AMC offered the same deal terms to all major studios as it did to Universal, according to two people with direct knowledge of the terms who are not authorized to comment. So AMC is shopping this around. That's even weirder. AMC offered to collect 20% of the gross revenue from the premium video on demand rentals and receive a 2% reduction in film rental terms, according to a studio source who is not authorized to comment. So AMC is shopping this deal around all over to the major studios. They want 20% of the gross from premium video on demand. Okay, that's an interesting, but let's break that down. So just as like an overview, when you release a movie in the theater, the ticket sales on average, 50% goes to AMC and 50% goes to the studio. So it's a 50-50 breakdown between AMC and, let's say, Universal, right? So with the PVOD situation, it would go 80% studio and then 20% AMC. But like the weird part about this is, what is AMC offering to get that 20%? They're not really offering anything. It's just a handshake deal that says, hey, if you allow us to play this movie on premium video on demand, we'll give you a cut. But AMC's not doing anything. They're not showing the movie in the theater. They're not selling tickets. They're not, having a staff that runs a movie theater to collect that 50% like they do on a movie theater, normal movie ticket. So it's just a very bizarre situation. So AMC's on the ropes. Their business is basically going under, and they're kind of just flailing around to try to find a deal. And Universal's game, because they're kind of, what's Universal about? Universal, if you think about the situation with COVID, Universal was the first to push their movie to premium video on demand, or premium video on demand. So Trolls World Tour never played in theaters. They pushed it directly to a VOD, which was the first company to do that. And it was really a shot across the bow here. This is the first sort of shot in this civil war that's going on. And so AMC, the moment that happened, AMC, the head basically said, we are banning all Universal movies. This was 3 months ago. So this, not even probably. So this is within a 3-month time span. We went from AMC's banned all of Universal's movies to now they're going to allow Universal to take movies from the theater and put them on VOD 3 weeks after. it doesn't make any sense from like, what was it before? Essentially 12 weeks. We went from 12 weeks to 3 weeks. And that's how much AMC has capitulated here. It only makes sense as this: AMC is going under. They don't have enough money to run their business anymore. They're done. Which is sad to say, because I did A-List. AMC I used to go to here in St. Louis like a couple times a week. They're okay. They're like a big multiplex, small theater type feeling. There's nothing special about it. There's nothing unique. But the screens were nice. The chairs were nice. It was a pleasant experience. It just wasn't really super unique. But you can tell why they're the biggest movie theater, because they offer sort of the middle of the road, average movie going experience all over the country. And so I have nothing against AMC. It's just their business decisions that they made were terrible, and which put this in a position where they are very desperate, and desperate people act desperately. And this is what this is. And so, we have the potential of the release window here getting dropped to 3 weeks. How there's been a lot of chatter. Well, how are the other studios going to respond? How are the other movie theater? How is Regal going to respond? Just to sort of lay that out, AMC's number 1, 8,000 screens. Regal's 2 in the US, 7,000 screens. So they're pretty equal. And then Cinemark's third with 4,500 screens. And then my favorite, Marcus, whose flagship theater, the Majestic, is where I grew up in Brookfield, Wisconsin. They have about 1,000 theaters, small fish compared to the other ones, but top 4. How are those? And then Regal also is owned by Cineworld, which is a worldwide huge company of movie theaters. They already came out and basically said, we do not see any business sense in this model. So you have AMC, who's trying to do these sort of, backroom deals with Universal to survive as a company. And then you have their biggest rival being like, that makes no sense. And you really do have to break it down as to what this means, because there's a lot of reactions you could have to this. One would be that like, well, yeah, this is always going to happen. I think everybody knew that premium on-demand movies were going to be a thing. With the success of Trolls World Tour during COVID, and then the success of like Invisible Man, and then also too, if you look at something like Hulu acquiring Palm Springs for like $22 million, I think they're probably going to recoup their costs on that with the amount of hype and buzz that movie has brought to Hulu. It's kind of seen as a Hulu original movie. It's not, but so there is this new world for digital distribution of brand new movies, which wasn't really the case 6 months ago. It was always potentially there. It's not like there's a technical hurdle. There's like a cultural hurdle and a business hurdle, and COVID knocked those down essentially. So it is a brand new world of digital distribution for brand new feature films. And the reaction to this might be, well, this was always going to happen. And yeah, maybe the 17-day window is pretty small. I think they were kind of negotiating before all this happened at a 45-day window or a 60-day window was the common numbers thrown around, which makes a lot more sense. Because if you think of it this way, movie theaters, a brand new movie in the theater makes most of its money in its first 4 weeks. It's about 85%, I think, or almost 90% for most films. So by then you're usually done. So from that perspective, you're like, well, okay, 17 days is pretty small, but if it makes 70% of its revenue in the first 3 weeks, it's really not going to hurt the movie theaters that much, right? And I can see that. But the thing that argument missed or does not really understand is that the exclusivity of a movie in the movie theater is what makes it valuable. The movies in and of themselves, are made for various amounts of money. A comic book movie could be $200 million budget with another 200 to market and release. And people don't realize that either. To release a movie like that and get people to show up, you got to spend like $200 million worldwide. I mean, it's insane. And so you have all of these different films with different costs associated with it. But what really makes it special is the fact that it's playing in that movie theater. And there is a built-in sort of unique value for a piece of content playing in a theater. If that same content plays on your computer screen or on your Roku at home, it doesn't have the same value. And I think that's one of the things that we've noticed with Netflix trying to do their own films. You look at something like Bright, I don't know. I think that was made for like $200 million or $150 million. I think was the budget on that. And you watch it and you're just sort of like, yeah, this doesn't feel like a feature film. This doesn't feel like a blockbuster movie. And I would say the same for almost every single Netflix original movie that has come out. It's just missing something. Even like the more recent Eurovision one with Will Ferrell and Rachel McAdams, it's a interesting, I wouldn't call it a good movie. It's an interesting movie. It has the same elements that you would see in a blockbuster, but it still just kind of feels and falls short. Now, why is that? Is that because it's produced differently? Not really. It's produced like the same film, but it doesn't have that cachet of being in a movie theater. And I think that people very much underestimate what that is. There is something special about going to see a movie in the theater. And it's not even the people that go and see it. It's just the fact that it's happening, that it's playing in a movie theater, that you can go see it, that adds to the value of that film. And when you drop the release window down to 17 days, what's going to happen is this. And this has already happened, in the last 3 or 4 years. And even before that, there was a whole different version of this, but I'll wait till it's on video was a big thing growing up with me. And back then it would be like, that's a commitment. If you wanted to see a movie, but you're like, I'm not going to go to the theater and spend like $6 back then. You're going to wait 9 months until it's on video, or you're going to wait like a year and a half until it's on like cable TV. So that was a big thing that people said back then. Now, more recently, it's like, I'll wait till it's on stream, until it's on Netflix. And so, that window for a Netflix release, going to a subscription video on demand service, as they're called in the industry. The window for that has been 9 months, sometimes 8 months. And that's pretty standard. It won't be on an HBO. It won't be on a Netflix or a Hulu or Amazon Prime for about 9 months after the release. This change also will change that. Basically, it's taken the foundation of the industry and kind of just thrown it up in the air and said, we're throwing this out. So every sort of release window is going to change. And so what's going to happen, I think, if this goes through, which it still may not. This is just a deal between AMC and Universal. Regal's not on board, clearly. I don't think Cinemark and Marcus are going to be on board. So how is that going to work if not all the theaters are on board? It won't work. It doesn't make any sense unless they're all on board. But if for some reason this gets through and becomes sort of codified as like the new release window for the industry, what's going to happen is this. And I think that there's some massive underestimating of this event or this phenomenon that's going to happen. It's no longer going to be, I'm going to wait 3 months until it's on VOD to rent it for $5.99. It's going to be, I'm going to wait a couple of weekends. I'm going to wait a couple of weeks. That's all it's going to feel like. A couple of weeks, 3 weeks, and then I can rent it for $20. And in the comfort of my own home, I don't have to go to the movie theater. I'm not going to buy concessions. I think there's a huge mistake being made on how many people are going to choose to do that over people who are going to go and see it in the theater. I think it's going to be a huge change and shift towards premium video on demand versus people going to the theater. I think, just to sort of guesstimate, like, let's take like an average, let's say $150 million film. Let's just say $100 million film, kind of middle of the road. It's like a $40 million budget, makes $100 million domestically. It's pretty good. I think what's going to happen, because you've basically ripped off the last 9 weeks of that performance. Now, you could argue, if you just went and looked at the box office run of a movie and removed the last 9 weeks, that's not going to give you an accurate picture of what's going to happen. What's going to happen is the entire amount that film's going to make is going to shrink, because the people that are going to buy tickets in the first 3 weeks aren't going to buy tickets anymore. They're going to wait until it's on premium video on demand. So not only have you sort of truncated the overall run, you've also eliminated a huge chunk of the first 3 week revenue. It makes zero sense for a movie theater industry to do this. It is just mind blowing that it's happening. And I think it's mostly because AMC is done. They're over. Their ship is sunk. They already struck the iceberg 3 months ago. They might have been done even without COVID. They took on so much debt to expand and sort of gobble up other movie theaters. They gobbled up Carmike movie theaters, which was big all over the South. Starplex, Cinetopia. This is all pretty recently where they took over these companies to become the biggest one, but they took on too much debt. And if things were normal and the movie theater industry was just kind of doing its thing and kind of leveling off like it has, well, it's been contracting, but let's say like revenue stayed at like 11, 12 billion in terms of ticket sales, they might have done okay and figured out a way to get out of that debt. But with COVID, they're in a tailspin they will not get out of, which is why they did this deal. And I don't see how any other of the movie theater companies are going to go in on this. You can't break the release window. Here's what I would say that you could do. And this is what I kind of had always thought was going to happen. There's a couple of ways you can make PVOD work. I think once things return to normal, one of these paths makes a little bit more sense for the industry. One is, okay, like 17 days is absurd. That is just dumb. It doesn't make any sense. You're destroying the exclusivity of your business. That doesn't make any sense. Something like 45 days to 60 days makes a lot of sense. And that was the original sort of intention of premium video on demand. The price, I think, makes sense. $20 to rent a movie is a lot of money to not own it. And I think people would do that, at the 45-day mark and 60-day mark. It's like, or you could argue that they could wait 30 more days until it's $6.99. Maybe, just maybe you could push it to like 30 days. But then I think you're going to see that similar effect where people are not going to see it in a theater and just wait till it's on premium video on demand. That's a possibility of doing that. The other thing that doesn't really add up to me, and I don't understand how it's going to work, is part of this deal is this 20% going to AMC if somebody rents the film on some PVOD platform. Okay, but like what happens when other theaters get involved? How is that 20% going to be broken up between theaters? How could you tag the theater that this person was going to go to instead? That makes zero sense. Like you'd have to have like this revenue share model with, I don't know how you do it, like the number of theaters you own in the United States. I mean, someone like the National Association of Theater Owners would have to sort of oversee this sort of arbitrage or this escrow of like this cash. So to give you an example, let's say 1 million people rent the new James Bond movie at the 17-day mark of this PVOD thing. So that's $20 million in revenue. Now, AMC is saying, yeah, we should get 20% of that. Well, who gets 20% of that? Does Regal get 20% of that? How is that 20% broken down between the different theaters? It just doesn't add up. It sounds completely chaotic. It makes no sense. And so I think this is, at the end of the day, this is really just the end of AMC is what it is. And if it spreads to other theaters and other studios, it could spell the end of the movie theater industry. My gut says if it does go through and it does happen, it's over. It's done. The movie theater industry as we know it will never be the same. In fact, we might lose 70% of theaters in this country because the business will no longer really make a whole lot of sense. I don't think that's going to happen, though. I do think that Regal, Cinemark, and Marcus are going to push back and be like, no, we're not going to do this. And the other studios are probably going to be like, that doesn't make any sense either, because think of how much money they make off the box office receipts. If Fast and the Furious does $400 million domestically, they get $200 million of that. If that all of a sudden, gets cut in half because of this new deal, they just lost $100 million. Like it doesn't bode well for a long-term healthy movie theater industry. It just doesn't. And my guess is that the other theaters won't go along with this, and the other studios I think will balk at it as well. But the question is then I'm left with after this, and kind of, why I want to do this podcast is, where is this all going to go? How is the movie theater industry going to change and evolve? It has to. Like I've been saying, it's already a contracting business. It was never going to go up in terms of the number of ticket sales. It's always going to get smaller. But there is going to be a moment of sort of like stabilization, I think, in that contraction. And with COVID, I think it's just going to speed everything up about 5 years, 6 years, maybe even a decade. I think when we come out of this, the winners aren't going to be AMC, Regal, or Cinemark, and maybe not even Marcus. I think it's going to be the smaller theater owners. I looked at sort of theaters like Landmark Theaters, which has about 252 screens, and they're more focused on art films. Something like Alamo Drafthouse, they have 35 theaters, 380 screens in the US. Studio Movie Grill is another decent one. And I think they're going to come out of this decently well, because ultimately they understand that the movie theater sort of activity, that leisure activity, is something very specific. And what happened in the 1990s when movie theaters basically exploded all over the country, like there's a new movie theater built like every week in the 90s. What ended up happening is that experience got very watered down. It became very bland. So like when you go into a movie theater, let's say 5-6 years ago, before this luxurization happened, where everything's a reclining seat, there's a nice grill with a mixologist out front, to make you a nice old fashioned. Before all of that happened in the last, let's say 5 years or something like that, maybe probably like 10 years, but it really has taken hold in the last 5 years. Movie theaters were bare bones, stale popcorn everywhere. The carpeting was disgusting. It was that awful kind of red crimson fabric on everything. And it just was not, it didn't feel luxurious. You didn't feel great. It almost felt like, you know what it reminds me of? Going to the movie theater like 10 years ago. And this is from like the 90s on until like the early 2010, let's say. It was like flying is now. Whereas flying 30, 40 years ago felt kind of special. And you felt special that you were getting on a plane. It was like this cool event. And now it feels like you're in a cattle car and they're shoving you in and they're gouging you on the stupid prices. And it costs way too much and it feels terrible the entire time you're in the plane. I think movie theater going became like that up until pretty recently. And what I think is going to happen with the COVID situation is all of that lingering part of the industry, that sort of bland mall movie theater experience, that's dead now. That has to die. It's all going away. And I think the specialty theaters like an Alamo Drafthouse and a Landmark Theaters, well, there's just an extra sense of magic to it, an extra sense of respect for the consumer and the person showing up. It's almost like you feel like you're in a club going there. I think that's what's going to happen. I think that is how the movie theater industry is going to survive. It's going to become a more luxury experience and maybe almost a more exclusive experience for a smaller group of people. One of the things I always point out about the industry that a lot of people don't realize, and I think a writer posted this on Twitter and I had to respond. I think he threw out the fact that like, only people go to 4 movies a year, and people a lot of these, well, that's really small. It doesn't sound like a lot. But when you look closer, like, and you can find this on the MPAA reports, they're out every year. The 2019 one's fantastic. It's a really fascinating document to go through. When you look closer at the numbers, yes, ticket sales have been down since 2002, and they're never going to go back up. It'll always be contracting. 1, but 2, when you look at that number of 4 movies or 5 movies per year, I think it's actually 4 point something or whatever. You have to contextualize that. So that's actually only 76% of the population goes to movies every year. Among that 76% of the population, yes, only 4.2 or something like that that's how many movies they go to a year. But when you look at the revenue and who drives ticket sales, who drives the box office revenue, it's not the casual moviegoer that goes 4 times a year. About 50% of all box office revenue is driven by 11% of the movie-going audience. 11% of that broader 76%. They're the ones that drive 50% of all box office revenue. And those are called frequent moviegoers. And a frequent moviegoer goes at least once a month, so 12 times a year. They are the bread and butter of this industry. And I think what's going to happen is all this sort of casual moviegoers and fair weather moviegoers and fans, they're going to they're suddenly going to be sort of cut off and kind of go away. And so if the industry, is committed to staying around long term, and I think they are, they should be catering to that frequent moviegoer, like someone like me. and a lot of my friends who love to go to the movies. And there is something magical about it for me to go to a movie in the theater. It's so different than watching it here in my house. Yeah, I got a big TV. Yeah, I got a great sound system. But it's not like the theater at all. And I think if the movie theater industry wants to survive, they need to create a theater experience that caters to the frequent moviegoer. That's really the key to this whole thing. And I think Alamo Drafthouse is almost there. I think the thing about Alamo Drafthouse is, and the cool part about them is they were instrumental in making the moviegoing experience more luxury. They were the first to serve food in a theater, which I hate. I absolutely hate that. I never want to go to one of those movie theater. I just don't like servers whispering and running around. To me, the theater is really a pristine environment where people shouldn't be moving around a lot. They obviously shouldn't be texting or talking on the phone, but like people are eating and there's servers and it's just not my thing. But you have to admit, like, that was a huge moment in the industry where they realized, oh, like, we can change what movie going is. And that was the movement away from that mall movie theater where there's teenagers yelling at each other and there's gum on the seats and people on their phones. Alamo Drafthouse bans people on their phones. Like, they did not let them back in. And so they were huge in shifting the experience to something more unique and special. And they're having restaurants out in the front of the house and stuff like that, and having alcohol in theaters. That was a big deal. That never happened. Like, you can, like, going to like Back to the Future 2 when I was a kid, I can't imagine someone being able to have a beer in there, because it was very like a family kind of place. That's no longer the case. And I think, Alamo has the right sort of idea. Where they go wrong is it's kind of snooty. It's a little bit of a nerd biased culture too. Not everybody's super into Star Wars or comic book movies. There needs to be sort of an Alamo Drafthouse for just the movie lover. What I really want to see, and maybe this never existed, but what I hope to see at some point, is like a neighborhood theater with like 4 screens that'll play like a big action movie, but it'll also play art stuff. It'll play stuff from exotic places like France or Germany or Japan. And we'll also play old movies. I think that is so important to put old movies on the screen. And I think the great model of that is like the New Beverly theater out in Los Angeles that Quentin Tarantino now owns. The schedule that they put up, and the sort of the selections, the curated selections that they make of older films is just fantastic. If I don't know what to watch, I just go to their monthly schedule, at least when they're open, and just look at the old movies that they're playing. And I'm like, what is this? And then you dive into, like, this is insane. How did I ever know this existed? And so that's like I think there's a place for that New Beverly Alamo model in kind of every city and in a lot of neighborhoods too. Now, there's always going to be comic book movies and huge tentpole stuff. But what's going to happen with Black Widow? What's going to happen with the new Marvel movies in general, and the new DCE movies like Wonder Woman and the next Aquaman and all that kind of stuff? There's probably going to be a place for them at a big multiplex, I think. But what if not? What if you could just put it online and say, let's do demand pricing? How much would someone pay to watch the new Black Widow? I bet you a lot of people, what if you did this? What if you said, okay, so Black Widow, it's going to come out September 1st. If you want to watch it September 1st through September 7th, you got to pay $50 to see it. If you want to wait 2 weeks, then we'll pop it down to 40, and then we'll pop it down to 30 on the 6-week mark. Like, it could get to the point where we're doing that. And then you get to the point where maybe there's day and date release, which has always been thrown around. And there's always been like to me, the craziest idea of like releasing a film in the theater and online at the same time. And that was the big sort of kerfuffle with AMC and Universal about Trolls World Tour. Trolls World Tour did so well on Premium VOD. The Universal boss said, hey, we might release this at the same time in theaters. And then AMC's like, we're banning all of your movies. And now they're like in bed together. So bizarre. But you could get that sort of strategy. That's the strategy that Amazon wants, and that more than anything that Netflix wants. Netflix wants to put its movies on Netflix and in a movie theater on the same day because they don't see it as, to them, it's just they're selling content. However you want to get it, you get it. And I understand where they're coming from with that. And this new PVOD deal opens that up, right? So now what could happen with a Netflix situation is now Netflix and Amazon Prime are going to be very interested in getting their bigger movies on theaters. And we saw a little bit of this last holiday season with The Irishman. Netflix was doing everything they could to get The Irishman in a movie theater because they thought, and Scorsese thought, that's where people need to see this movie. And I think that they're right. Seeing on Netflix is fun, but I would rather much have seen it in a movie theater where I could focus for whatever, 30 hours, however long it is. And they negotiated down to 60 days, but it wasn't good enough for Netflix. Now with this 17-day sort of wild card release window, it opens up a huge possibility for streaming studios to get their stuff in a movie theater, which I think is pretty exciting. I think that that's a cool idea. And I always wondered, like, watching Stranger Things in a movie theater would be amazing with that sound system and a group of people. It would be so much fun. But yeah, I mean, who knows where this is going to go? I do think, kind of to close this off, because I've been rambling for so long. Obviously, I love talking about this stuff. To close this thing out, though, here's what I think is going to happen. I think that AMC and Universal are going to try and push this on other studios and other movie theater companies. I don't think it's going to work all that well. I think it's actually going to backfire pretty big for AMC. And I think AMC goes bankrupt about March 2021 is my guess. They're already going to go bankrupt outside of this deal. This is kind of going to be the nail in the coffin for them. They're not serious anymore. They're not a serious business. This is something a crazy person would do. This would be like, this is the equivalent of, owning a car lot and just basically being like, yeah, I'm going to sell these cars for like 95% off. If they don't sell in the first 3 weeks, it makes no sense. And so I think that AMC is done. I do think this is a window or a sort of first foot in the door for a serious premium video on demand discussion to happen. I don't think the 17 days is serious. I think it's complete bullshit and insane. I think we could look at a 45-day window with Regal and Marcus and Cinemark, the surviving three big ones. I think that we're going to get that. I think we're going to get a 45-day window. The $20 price makes sense to me. And that way it's the best of both worlds. You cut the release window in half so the studios are happy. Consumers are happy. They don't want to wait 3 months to rent it on VOD. They want to see it pretty soon. And then, I think what we're going to get, and this has always kind of been a business idea that I've had for a long time, and I tried to raise money for it, but no one listened to me, of course, a premium video on demand streaming service, which I think would be amazing. And so like maybe at the 45-day mark when you can rent all of these movies, you have a streaming service where you pay, I don't know, like $50 a month, $40 a month, something high. So only sort of cinephiles people who really want to get it. And you can watch any brand new release. So any movie that comes in the theaters that's on premium VOD, you can watch streaming over and over and over again on this service. I think that's a really huge win. I think that's where it's going to go. And I hope that someone sees that and realizes that people just want good movies. And either they want to go to the theater, and they want to go to the theater, they'll pay and they'll do it. And that's a small minority of people. That's, we say 76% of moviegoers, but it's really a much smaller chunk that drive a majority of that revenue. It's the cinephiles, it's the film nerds, it's the film snobs, people like me who are, really love that experience. But I think most people are cool just watching on their TV or phone, and they'll pay good money for it as long as it's a good movie. Anybody's going to pay $20 to see Black Swan. I'm not going to, but I would pay $15 to go see it in the movie theater, which is, that just tells you the difference between different types of people. And so I think that's where we're going to go. I don't think any of this is going to stick. It's too outrageous. It's too insane. And AMC's too weak. And Universal's just being a bully and taking advantage of them. They see blood in the water and they're just chomping down. I don't think it's going to stick at all. But I do think the movie theater industry will never be the same. I think pre-VOD is going to be a reality for forever. It's already out there, but it was sort of a temporary fix because of COVID. I think it's going to be there forever now. And I think the release window is going to drop, but I don't think it's going to drop 17. I think 45 to 30 days makes sense. I would say 45 makes a lot more sense than 30. And I think what we're going to see in the movie theater industry is a massive contraction. AMC is going to die. Regal might die. Some of the smaller chains are not going to survive because they just don't have the capital on hand. I think we could see a reduction in movie theaters by like 50% over the next 5 years. I think it's going to be that big of a collapse. But I think at the end of the day, for consumers, it's going to be a lot better experience for movie theaters. I think we're going to get a lot more content. We're going to get like a lot cooler streaming studios are going to play movies in theaters. I could see that. And I think that I think ultimately it's going to be better for both movie lovers and movie production companies. I think you could get away with, a rom-com made for $20 million. Like Palm Springs is a perfect example. That should be playing at a landmark theater. That should be playing at Alamo Drafthouse. And that would be a great movie to see with a group of people. Whereas, a year ago, if that played, what would happen if Palm Springs got released in let's say when it got released, July 15th in the summer, it would open to 6 million and closed out at 18 or 20. A studio only gets half, only $10 million, all the distribution costs, it would lose money. But I think in a different ecosystem of movie theaters where there's half of the number of movie theaters, they're more sort of catered towards cinephiles and people are really into seeing movies in theaters. I think everybody wins. And I hope that's what happens from this. In any event, guys, thanks for listening to this one-off episode. Wildline is retired. Do check us out over at Film Trace. We love doing that podcast. It's a lot of fun. We need more listeners. I think it's a really interesting listen if you're into sort of how movies are made and what happens, and the sort of story of a single movie is sort of the byline to that podcast. So do listen to Film Trace. Thanks a lot, guys. This has been the Wildline Podcast.